Transkei is famous for the rare and rugged beauty of its wild coast. If you've never taken enough time to find out more about the ecology of this wild coast, then maybe you'd better stay with us now as our producer takes us through some of these ecosystems.
Between the Natal and Eastern Cape coastlines lies the coast of the Transkei. Far more rocky and rugged than bordering coastlines, this stretch of southern African coast is termed the Wild Coast. To its inhabitants, the Wild Coast provides a ready source of food in the form of fish, shellfish and agricultural crops grown on the rich, fertile coastal soils. In addition to this, the Wild Coast provides a source of income from its many visitors. These visitors come from far afield to experience the beauty and splendor of the Wild Coast. The average visitor spends his or her time swimming in the warm waters or fishing for the elusive big one. The less energetic prefer to walk the beaches, boat on the lagoons and estuaries, or just laze around in the tranquil and relaxing atmosphere of the Wild Coast. But how many people who visit this beautiful coastline stop to look at its ecology? From the sandy beaches to the rocky shores, the estuaries and lagoons to the sheer cliffs dropping deep into the sea, and the dunes and coastal forest and thicket, the Wild Coast consists of many complex ecosystems. All of these ecological units are interlinked with their neighbors and are even linked with areas far away by ocean currents, animals and winds. It is this diverse ecology, together with the interactions of climate, geology and ocean currents, that gives the Wild Coast its mystical charm to tourists and nature lovers alike. The edge of the continental shelf swings away from the shore from Transkei southwards, deflecting the Agulhas current away from the coast. As a result, the south coast, from about Port St. John's to Cape Point, has cooler coastal waters and a different set of animals and plants from the Natal and Mozambique currents. It is the tail end of the Agulhas current passing Transkei which gives us our relatively warm and subtropical waters. Having explained why our coastline displays such scenic beauty and intriguing diversity of animal life, we want to invite you on a brief tour of one of the most unique and fascinating ecosystems of the Wild Coast. Reaching their southernmost limits in Transkei, we are privileged to play host to the mangrove swamps. Contrasting markedly with the rough shores of the Wild Coast, we find peace and tranquility along the shores of our many estuaries and lagoons. It's here, under favorable conditions, that the mangroves make their homes. The mangrove swamps are so called after the characteristic trees found in these areas, the mangroves. These trees are members of a unique group of plants, the halophytes, or plants capable of living under saline conditions. They have formed special adaptations, enabling them to settle, colonize, and grow in tidal salt waters. Scientific naming gives each animal, plant, or insect a genus and species name, which could be likened to a first name and a surname. It's these scientific names which we'll use to refer to the plants and animals of the mangrove swamps. In Transkei, we find 3 different genus of mangrove trees: Avicennia, Rhizophora, and Bruguiera. These 3 trees can easily be told apart. Avicennia, the more common and most striking tree in the mangrove swamp, is a tree of considerable stature, growing up to 12 meters and often towering above the other tree types. Avicennia most frequently fringes the mangrove community. A large number of cable roots radiate out from the base of the trunk at a depth of 200 to 500 millimeters. These anchor the tree firmly in the soft sediment and provide a substrate from which pneumatophores called pencil roots can grow. The pencil roots emerge from the sediment to a height of between 20 and 700 millimeters and form the aerial breathing roots of Avicennia. Bruguera, like Avicennia, is one of the more common trees in the mangrove community. This tree is often rather small, but can reach up to 18 meters in height and prefers the central regions of a swamp. The root system is essentially the same as that of Avicennia, but the cable roots emerge from and re-enter the sediment at intervals to form looping, knob-like protuberances. These knee roots, as they're called, are the aerial breathing roots of Bruguera. Bruguera has developed an ingenious and unique way of propagating itself in the mangrove communities. We can see down here 3 stages in propagation of Bruguera. First of all is this seed which I've just picked from the tree. The seed, when mature, falls to the ground, assisted by its torpedo-like shape. It sticks deep into the ground when it lands to avoid being washed by the tide as it comes in and out. Eventually, the seed germinates to produce a seedling, like the one here. Rhizophora is the least common of the 3 mangrove trees. It's found in relative abundance in large mature mangrove swamps like those of Mozambique and northern Natal, but is only rarely encountered in small swamps and those which are at early stages of colonization. Rhizophora is not a particularly large tree, rarely exceeding 9 meters in height. It's characterized by numerous aerial roots which originate in the tree trunk high above the ground, arch away from it, and branch freely before entering the sediments. These prop roots, or stilt roots, emerge from the tree at various levels and go underground at random, thereby forming a tangled root mass around the tree base. It is Rhizophora which presents the common image of a mangrove tree. These trees are able to colonize mud banks, in effect reclaiming land from the sea. The elaborate root system of the mangrove traps silt brought down by the rivers, so that the mud banks are not only stabilized by the trees, but grow to form a new shoreline. The choice of habitat made by these trees presents them with 2 major problems. One is lack of oxygen in the sediment in which they grow. The second is having to grow in salty water. We've used the aerial roots of the mangroves as an aid to identification, but these roots serve a far more important function. The sediments which accumulate in the intertidal zones around mangrove swamps are composed of fine-grained particulate matter of both terrestrial and marine origin. The soil, which is washed down to form the mud banks, is rich in nutrients, but very fine in texture. It forms a deep, black and pungent mud. In most zones of a mangrove area, this muddy substratum is waterlogged at all times. Even when the tide is out, there's no flow of water over the sediments, and water already present tends to be retained because of the finely particulate nature of the sediment. As a result, mangrove substrates are characteristically anaerobic or anoxic, or in other words, these sediments contain no oxygen. When exposed at low tide, the roots, that's pencil roots, stilt roots and knee roots, of the various trees absorb oxygen directly from the atmosphere and supply it to the main root system. The pneumatophores thus act as ventilating chimneys for the mangrove, supplying the oxygen that is not available in the mud. The second problem, that of growing in salty water, is solved in different ways by the various mangroves. Avicennia species exclude the salt ions at root level, and any getting past are exuded through the leaves by special salt glands. The sap of Avicennia is about 100 times more salty than that of an average land plant. All these trees, once established as a swamp, make a very amenable habitat for a great many creatures. They provide ideal places of shelter and large amounts of food in the form of detritus from decaying leaves. Even though such a pleasant habitat is provided, the animals face much the same problems as the trees themselves, including the lack of oxygen in the mud and constant tidal action.
The second half of our program introduces us to the animals of the mangrove community. According to Hywel Lewis, there are very few animals which are absolutely exclusive to the mangroves. Some of the animals making their home within the mangroves are so suited to the swamps that they are almost as characteristic of the mangrove habitat as the trees themselves.
These mangrove animals fall into three major categories: those associated with the thick anoxic muddy sediments, those restricted to the water, and those which live in the tree canopy. As already mentioned, the mangrove mud is a very special habitat, and the animals making this their home are the most highly specialized of the mangrove fauna as a whole. Over and above the habitats of the mud banks, there are the tree trunks and aerial roots of the mangroves, which protrude from the mud and water and provide a dry refuge at all times. The creatures of the muddy levels, which are really characteristic of the mangrove, are small amphibious fish and a variety of crabs and mollusks. They rely on water to a considerable degree, but they can tolerate its absence in the environment for extended periods. The mangrove swamps provide them with the half-wet and half-dry environment, which is ideal. Some of these animals are burrowers and others are wanderers. One of the wanderers, and certainly one of the most fascinating animals of the mangroves, is the mud skipper, or Periophthalmus caelolo, by its scientific name. This amphibious creature moves freely from water to mud or onto the roots of the mangroves, its grey-brown mottled skin blending perfectly with its muddy background. It's a fish, but by no means an ordinary fish. As an adult, it is amphibious and is as likely to be observed on a mangrove tree root or low-hanging Avicennia branch as crossing a tidal pool or skipping across the mud bank. The average mud skipper grows to about 70 millimeters long and is torpedo-shaped with bulging eyes raised above the level of the head and body like miniature perioscopes. The mud skipper can swim, not brilliantly, but it can swim. Its real medium is the surface of the water, however. Here it has evolved a rapid and effective way of getting about. It swims along with its eyes projecting above the surface, then uses its tail to launch itself into a miniature flight, lasting only a fraction of a second. As it lands, it flicks its tail again and goes back into flight. This whole progress is seen as a series of quick, skeltering skips. When alarmed or in pursuit of prey, the insectivorous mud skipper uses a variant of its skipping technique on the surface of the water. The mud skipper survives on land by taking a gulp of air as it emerges from the water, and then closing its gill chambers to the outside atmosphere, and thus sealing in oxygenated air and keeping the gill chambers moist. In addition to this, the mud skipper is able to breathe through its skin because of fine superficial blood vessels capable of absorbing oxygen directly from the air. When the tide rises, Periophthalmus joins in the mass exodus from the mud surface, either hopping onto a mangrove root or moving for the duration onto the land. In contrast to the wanderers, such as the mud skipper, we find burrowers, such as the fiddler crab or yucca species. These crabs add abundant splashes of bright color to the mangrove swamps. Fiddler crabs are small, but they are gregarious and can be associated in enormous numbers, forming extensive colonies on the mangrove mud in which individuals occur only centimeters apart. Males of the genus Yucca are very easily recognized by the characteristics of the chelipeds or claw legs. The male has one cheliped, which is very much enlarged, especially at the claw end, and is more vividly colored than its smaller counterpart. The cheliped is sometimes so enlarged that it's bigger than the crab's body itself. The entire cheliped is elaborately jointed and is most frequently held across the front of the body in a folded horizontal position, much like a fiddle, hence the common name of fiddler crab. Interestingly, the enlarged cheliped can form on either the right or the left side of the crab. These crabs are shy of intruders and are particularly sensitive to ground vibrations. At the first hint of a tremor, they scuttle for the cover of their burrows. The enlarged chelipeds are used by the male in the courtship ritual to beckon his potential mate. This courtship takes place in midsummer. Scuttling to and fro and beckoning and waving madly with his cheliped, the ritual develops into a sort of frenzied dance in which the whole community of crabs eventually takes part. Copulation takes place on the mud with the crabs face to face. When the eggs are laid, they're kept by the female on her body until they develop into free-swimming larvae, whereupon they join the marine plankton. Like the mud skipper, fiddler crabs are amphibious, and they too have evolved gills in which moisture is retained while they are out of the water. More agile on land than in the water, they run sideways at high speed on their 8 walking legs. Their claws are hollowed out like small shovels to collect surface mud and transfer it to their mouths where organic matter is extracted from the mud. The residue is discarded as a trail of small round pellets or pseudo-feces. Burrows are made independently by both male and female fiddler crabs. The depth varies, but is usually between 12 and 18 centimeters, and at the bottom is a chamber in which the crab can rest and reorientate itself before returning to the surface. This turning chamber is at the water table, so that even at low tide it retains some water. As the tide comes in, the crabs take refuge in their burrows, plugging the burrow behind them with mud, This not only protects them from marine predators, but also encloses a supply of air for the crab. When the tide recedes again, the crabs return to the surface, where they make a fuss of cleaning themselves and lavishing special care on their enlarged cheliceds, before settling down for another spell of mud swallowing. We've shown you one of the characteristic crabs of the mangroves, the fiddler crab or yucca species. Now we want to introduce you to one of the characteristic snails or mollusks of the mangrove swamps. This mollusk is commonly called the climbing whelk or mangrove snail, and its scientific name is Theridia decollata. The snail feeds on the mud at low tide, and when the tide comes in, bringing with it fish and crabs, the snail moves up the mangrove trunks to escape from them. How this creature is able to predict the arrival of tides with such accuracy is a mystery. This mystery is deepened by the fact that the snail's inbuilt clock allows it to predict the arrival of the fortnightly spring tides as well. At these times, fewer snails descend from the trees to feed on the mud, and they retire earlier to avoid getting washed over by the water. This brings us to the end of our brief tour of the mangroves. Please remember that we've only looked at a handful of the creatures living in the mangroves, just those most characteristic and noticeable. There are many more, all unique in their own way, and all just as important in the ecology of these areas.
And while you appreciate the uniqueness of the wild coast, please remember to keep it clean for the next person also to enjoy. And so from all of us, it's a good night. Hello and welcome to this evening's program. Transkei's climate, often crowded rural areas and bad agricultural habits, lead inevitably to massive soil erosion. This initiates a further cycle of denudation and further erosion, which is properly termed an environmental disaster. It has long been known that soil erosion in Transkei is a very real problem needing attention. The scale of the problem is immense, and some of the eroded areas are heartbreakingly bare. This is obvious to anyone driving through the country. In order to tackle the problem of soil erosion, the Transkei Soil Conservation Program, the TSCP, was initiated in 1985. This program incorporates the principles of integrated environmental management, which are fundamental to its success. The TSCP is funded by the Engineering Services branch of the Transkei Department of Agriculture and Forestry, the Department of Manpower, and by the Special Employment Action Program known as SEEP through the South African Embassy. The project is directed by a steering committee comprising officials of the Department of Agriculture and Forestry, the Department of Manpower, and program managers Hill Captain Scott. The program is currently active in 3 districts of Transkei, that is Herschel, Kalanga, and Zolo.
We're here in the Zolo district of Transkei, looking at some of the work done by the Transkei Soil Conservation Program. This program aims to stop the soil erosion occurring in Transkei and to rehabilitate some of the badlands you can see here. We employ large numbers of people, as you can see behind me, to cut stone for building large structures, like on my left here. These structures are built to stop the flow of water across the lands. This water carries all the silt and all the soil from the good lands where people have been farming, where sheep have been grazing. You can see here a typical example of where the water's run off the lands and taken with it all the soil, leaving just bare subsoil. This structure we've just shown you, it's hoped this will catch all the silt and build up a plain behind it, which can be revegetated and will provide grazing for future generations. What you're looking at now is a sheet wash plain, full of gullies and rills. The water's washed over this, and with time it's taken all the topsoil from the land, so you can see just bare subsoil now. The small peaks in between the gullies are subsoil. This subsoil has been baked very hard in the sun. Now at this stage, the subsoil is completely impermeable to water, and all runoff runs straight down off this plain. This is where our structure comes in, to catch the runoff and slow it down, so further down there won't be such an erosion problem. You can see how hard the subsoil is baked. If I hit it with this spade, it can't even break it. I'm now standing deep in one of the typical dongas of the Transkei, again in the Zolo district. You can see how the water is gouged right down, and you can see by my height the depth it's cut down to. The structures here will eventually all be taken out by the water, and the water will widen the whole donga. No grass can grow in this donga, nothing can. When the water rises up during floods, it can come up to heights right up to the top of the donga, right above my head. This can support no life. It just widens and takes away the people's land with it. This is the sort of erosion but the soil conservation program aims to stop. Now what we can see here is a huge sheet wash plain stretching from the area of the gullies far down behind me to where there's a river in the bottom of the valley. This whole area is completely denuded of soil. There's only tiny little bits of grass growing here and there, and it's of no use to anyone. This is the sort of area again which needs revegetating. This area needs time to recover. It needs proper management. It needs structures to be built to retain what soil is still left. This is another one of the structures built by the workers of the soil conservation program. It's been built from dressed stone, and the object of the structure is to stop the water running across the field down into the donga and cutting the donga back up into the field, which hopefully can be used for agricultural purposes in the future. This is one of the weirs built out of dressed stone and sunk into a gully to stop the flow of water down the gully. When the water flow stopped coming down here, silt and soil builds up behind the weir. You can see already from the rains we've had, a lot of soil is built up, and we've planted aloes behind the weir to start some revegetation, to start the roots anchoring the soil in. These are the people who reap the direct benefits of the work of the soil conservation program. It's their land that's being worked on, and it's their land that's being reclaimed. To put this whole project into perspective, you can see the village as we've passed it, and you can see the lands that are badly eroded, and further on you can see the lands that are being reclaimed. Hopefully in the near future the people will be able to restock the lands, plant crops, and use the lands as they should be used. I'm talking to you now from inside the wall of a donga, inside a sinkhole, where the rainwater's washed down and has actually carved a huge hole which goes straight up there, which as you can see is big enough for someone to stand in. The rain washing down the sides of the donga creates these organ pipes where it gullies down and takes out all the soil, and they're hard, they're very hard and they're very rough. As you can see here, they don't break apart easily. This is another one of the holes here. It doesn't go in as deep as the other one, but it goes all the way straight up and out to the top on the veld. And the water comes pouring down here when it rains, out and into the gully down below. I'm standing in the entrance to a soil pipe. This pipe stretches far up behind me, further than I can see. The water that makes the soil pipe has seeped down from fields above and runs out here and down the gully. You can see the fields above, where the water collects and seeps through.
iron will get you through. Iron will get you through. Iron will get you through.
Erosion is a battle between elements of nature, wind, water, and soil. When raindrops fall on unprotected soil, they strike with terrific force. The soil particles are loosened by raindrops, and excess water runs off and carries with it soil particles. Runoff water concentrates in low-lying areas, forming gullies and later even dongas. When man cultivates the soil, he removes plant cover, allowing erosion to take place. Overpopulation of Transkei's rural areas has led inevitably to overstocking of the veld. The generally recommended stocking rate for the Transkei's veld is just less than 2 large stock units per hectare. That's roughly 2 cows or 4 to 5 sheep or goats per hectare. Actual stocking rates that we have observed are as high as 6 large stock units per hectare. In other words, the veld is carrying up to 3 times as many animals as it should. Having so many animals on the veld leads to severe soil erosion. The grass is overgrazed, resulting in reduced ground cover. This allows rain and surface water to run freely over the land and carry away soil particles with it. This process starts off slowly, but once sufficient soil has been lost, it becomes difficult for the grass to re-establish, and soon large areas of eroded ground appear. It is not only by overgrazing that the land is destroyed by overstocking, but also from constant trampling by the animals along the same paths day after day, killing the grass growing on these paths and leaving them open to gullying during periods of rain. The primary mission of the Transkei Soil Conservation Program is to halt the debilitation of the districts and increase the long-term ability to support the population. This is done through a monitored program of education and construction of appropriate structures aimed at preventing further erosion. The Transkei Soil Conservation Program also provides employment opportunities in economically depressed areas and develops skills in veld management and maintenance. The full participation of the community is essential to success, and regular meetings are encouraged to get ideas and suggestions from the community, bearing in mind that the program is dealing with rural people who can be suspicious of change and often resist impositions on their traditional way of life, particularly farming practice. The objectives of the Transkei Soil Conservation Program can be summarized as follows: education in the techniques of veld management and the promotion of environmental awareness, soil conservation and rehabilitation of damaged areas, provision of employment, protection of capital works such as dams, pipelines and weirs from siltation and erosion, projecting a role model for the other areas of Transkei via publicity and the visible success of the project. The project is structured around the project manager or regional conservation engineer, whose duties include community liaison, instruction of project personnel, and provision of technical and administrative support to the project in active districts. Each district has 2 district development officers, or DDOs, in control of area conservation officers, or ACOs. 1 ACO is employed for each administrative area. The DDO is a permanent post with the Transkei Department of Agriculture and Forestry, while the ACOs are appointed and trained once the project begins in an administrative area. The ACOs supervise the project labor, which consists of charge hands and labourers. The project supervision structure is designed to productively employ as many people as possible, and a ratio of 1:8 between supervisor and supervised is maintained as an optimum level of supervision and productivity. Expensive machinery is not involved because all the work is accomplished by manual labour. Money is spent getting people out into the fields, explaining the whys and hows of the job, and then supervising progress. The aim is for the community eventually to be able to take complete responsibility for their areas. 92% of the project money is spent in the form of salaries, and this has the additional effect of providing employment and environmental education for a vast number of people that would otherwise be out of reach. Once the program has operated in an area, a core knowledge is left behind, which will result in effective soil conservation and veld management in the future. Success can be measured by the fact that in those areas where the soil conservation program has run its course, the local population, through their own initiative and cost, continue to maintain the structures built by them, illustrating their understanding of the work. The Department of Agriculture and Forestry and project managers are convinced that better results would be obtained if this approach were followed by more soil conservation programs in Southern Africa.
Apha njengoba ubona sinqanda amanzi angachitheki emasimini abe nokumosha kana njalo lamanzi yokuba siwanqanda ayahamba athi apha hamba khona akwazi ukuchithela ngapha ngasemasimini ukwenzela uba angangeni emasimini achithela kwezi stone packs esizakhile pha ngasezantsi. Okokuqala xa uzokwekha le nto sithi si-stone pack siye sijonge indawo uba ngabe stone pack sime kwindawo enjani, sijonge okokuba amanzi apha jika khona ungasakha i-stone pack ungangasakhi kusini na. Uthi wakusakha eso stone pack ujonge i-distance yakho xa umile ubone ukuba umhlaba xa kuya kusina unakho ukuthi uye ugcwala uvale kule ndawo efanele ukuba kuvaleke kuyo. Ngokuya uya usebenza ujonga indawo apho amanzi athi adibane khona nalapho indonga zithi zenzeke khona. Njengoba ubona ke ukwehla apha kuzindonga kwaye sivalile ke apha sijonga ukuthi njengoba kukho indonga ezehla kwelacala, kukho indonga ezehla phakathi, kukho indonga ezehla straight njengoba ujongile ukuyophuma ezantsi egqini. Sijonge ke kuloo ndawo ukuthi sifanele sivale ndawoni, sivale njengoba ubona sithandile ukuyama kwicala lamasimi ukwenzela ntoni udonga olu ungayiludleka lukurheka lumoshe amasimi.
We're now in the middle of the Herschel district. This structure has been built for a long time now in order to curtail the soil erosion in this gully. There's just been a thunderstorm, and behind me you can see where the water, which would have just rushed down the gully and taken the soil away with it, has been stopped and actually built up to a high level. You can see this water is a very muddy brown color because of all the soil and silt it's carried from the mountains up above down with it.
Now we are at Sunduza administrative area in the district of Herschel. I'm standing on a stone pack which was built in 1988. Behind me you can see a gabion structure. These are two structures which we are normally building in this soil conservation program. This stone pack helps as a backup for the gabion basket which is behind me. The height of this stone pack is equal to the base of the gabion basket which is behind me. This helps to allow the silt to flow right up to the base of the gabion basket which is behind me. So in that manner we can have this gully terraced. If you look at the gabion basket which is behind me, right up there, that gabion basket is 3 meters high, which means that gully, the depth of the gully behind me was 3 meters. But now, because of the silt which comes right down from this area, from the residential area and right up from the mountains, that gabion basket, that gabion structure is now silting up. Another feature which is prominent in that gabion basket is the reeds that we have planted behind it. The reeds that we've planted in there, we planted a couple, but now because of the water, of the pool of water, and the amount of silt that's accumulated behind that structure, the reeds are flourishing, they are growing well. The reason of putting that type of reed, which is called the flatus reed, is that in winter it becomes a fodder for the animals. If it can grow up that whole valley, the people around us might have a fodder bank with a type of reed. Another thing is, if that reed is growing in that area, it will also help to build up silt behind it, to catch all the silt and help and act as a filter, and then it will accumulate more silt behind it. So those are basically what we are using in this soil conservation program. The vegetation that we are using, we use it so that it be beneficiary to the people of that particular area. Another thing is, with the water that's accumulated around in that area, in that gabion structure, the people which are on both sides of the gully can use that water for their gardens and grow some vegetables in their gardens, and then they can irrigate with the water that accumulated behind those structures.
I'm standing here on what used to be a donga. The work of the Soil Conservation Program has filled this in using weirs, which you can see to my right. Filling in this donga has not only protected the road, but has also protected this village far on my right. Otherwise, the donga would have cut back into the village and cut right into the road. At this sort of work sometimes, which can appeal more to the people than work in far-off districts where they don't experience the direct benefits.
This structure on which I'm standing on is meant to break that velocity of the water coming down this structure, to allow it not to scour the ground and cause more damage. Now, at the foot of the structure, right down there, there was a structure which we built there, so that when that water reaches the bottom, it flows smoothly down, not rush going into the next terrace. So that was also meant to protect the gully itself from breaking and falling down. The three people that you see in front of me, two ladies and an old man. The two ladies are the people that we call charge hands in our project, in our organizational structure. They are the people that were supervising the work that you see in front of us. This inlet drop that you see in front of us was built by these two ladies supervising a team of 20 people.
Keeping in mind the long time periods required for felt rehabilitation to occur, and sometimes unfortunate weather patterns, we can show the final product of the project taking a number of forms, such as soil erosion and felt reclamation structures, improvements in the condition of the land, improved felt management skills of the rural people, employment, economic upliftment as a result of better felt management, awareness of the need for soil conservation.
Soil feeds plants, and plants feed man. So please look after your soil, and your soil will look after you. Till same time tomorrow evening when Wowo Majeke looks into the nitty-gritties of sound engineering. Cheerio.
These four tanks are storing water which is being pumped from a spring, which is right down in the valley below us. We're going to go down there now. There's a small pump stand there, which is just powerful enough to fill these tanks over a period of 5 hours. So what happens is the water is taken from the spring down in the bottom, which is where everyone was walking to collect the water, and you'll see it's very steep. And on a very hot summer's day, it's not a nice job to have to walk down there and back up with a bucket full of water on your head. So there's 3 storage tanks at the spring. The water is taken from the spring into the storage tanks, then into the pump. And what happens is someone will go down every morning and pump 2 tanks of petrol full out of the pump, which is enough to fill all these. It just sets a nice time limit, having them pump using 2 tanks of petrol on the pump. And then this is enough to supply this whole section of village, which stretches, I would say, almost a kilometer down there for a whole day. So if they pump every morning, then they can just come and load up here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now what Max has done is he's just built it up to catch all the water. The pipe that goes to the tanks is just behind the wall there. And it's got a galvanized pipe with holes drilled in it to act as a filter, and it should be covered in gravel as an additional filter. And the stream flow here we estimate is about 20 litres a minute. So we worked out the flow from here, we worked out the capacity the village needed, how much we needed in storage, how much the pump could pump. So then we ended up with 3 tanks here and the 4 up at the top. Because while you're pumping these 3 tanks dry, it's of course refilling. And it refills a tank